arguing amongst ourselves. So definitely, I would say those three things is that education, flexibility controls, and then the more data for risk modeling are key to kind of pushing these types of things forward.
And as for me, how I got involved with the power system space was I was working for a defense contractor in the DC area in late 2001, and I finally decided I think it was time to go back home again. And I took this job with this company that I didn't really know a whole lot about, and I realized very quickly that the power industry, especially in this particular outfit that I was with at the time, was roughly 10 years behind the rest of, well, every other industry with regards to any sort of computer security. And the challenges that presented were such that I couldn't walk away from it because I'm a glutton for punishment. And there was so much to do that I never had a chance to get bored. Now, after about 6 years of that, we got the organization as a whole to actually a very good place, and I was able to move on. And the organization I'm with now is such that it requires the same sort of care and feeding that the previous organization that I was at needed. And with respect to NERC CIP, well, NERC was founded in 1968 as a non-profit, and all of the regulations that they put forward were all strictly voluntary adherence. And with the Energy Act in 2005, those became mandatory. So now there's this big rush on to actually get up to compliance, and you see all the vendors sending out all the various pieces saying, our widget will help protect you against X. So it again presents a landscape that is such that it keeps me fully engaged and frustrated. Cool.
So Katie, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Everybody else sounds like a drowning robot.
Actually, everyone else is the cast of the parents on the cast of Peanuts. Yesterday when you and I were talking, you were filling me in some of the more crazy politics stuff that was going on in terms of how things actually happen in ISO. It was very enlightening. I was hoping that you could summarize some of that, and you were saying that, or maybe tell us about some of the specific drama that to the extent that you can.
Well, the drama is actually still ongoing. So, you know, I've been working on this for close to 3 years at this point, you know, the draft has gone through various iterations, and one of the problems is that to be the editor, which is basically the person in charge of the content of the draft, to be the editor of the draft, you don't actually have to be a subject matter expert in the area that you are drafting. This seems counterintuitive, however, this is just one of the things, quirky little things about ISO. So as a result, you know, there's a working group that's comprised of experts and from various national bodies, and then there's the editor, and the editor sort of is in charge of, you know, running the working group and gathering all, you know, gathering all the input from the experts. And sometimes these discussions get really heated, especially when you're dealing with somebody who isn't familiar with the subject. So arguments around proper terminology, I can think of basically, you know, some of the very basic terminology around vulnerability disclosure, such as, oh, I don't know, vendor. The ISO people tend to try and make up their own terms, or not really make them up, but replace terms with ISO terms. And so there was this big argument about replacing vendor with supplier, even though supplier isn't actually accurate for the purpose that we're using it for. In some people's minds who only know ISO stuff, they can't really see that. All they see is that in ISO land, vendor is a subset of supplier, and per ISO rules, you're supposed to use, you know, the master term, and you can't use the subset term, and all of this stuff. So we get into, you know, quite heated arguments. And then we also get into heated arguments about scope. And it was during one of these particular arguments that I ended up, you know, getting pretty hot around the collar and decided that it would be best if I just recused myself from that editing session before I started throwing water bottles at people. So I closed up my laptop and I walked out. And this was 2 days ago. So I walked out for a few hours, and then I came back and did, you know, my formal proper ISO thing of reporting on what U.S. national body felt was the status and the progress of the draft and all of these things, you know, and there are liaison statements and all kinds of, you know, weird ISO lingo and processes, but, you know, it got pretty crazy. Further, I mean, you argue for hours and hours, you know, you kind of very each other down, you go in these logical, you know, crazy circles, and then at the end of the day, you take each other aside and you make little backroom deals, like, well, okay, if you give me this, then I'll give you that, or you give me this and I'll give you that, and it's just completely, you know, at the end of the day, it's about playing by the rules to your advantage, playing the game, and making your deals, your alliances. So that's kind of how it works, and we wonder why these things come out and they look like they do.
Thanks. So, Mike, you were saying, we were talking the other week, and you were telling me that, like with PCI, there's very heavily vendor influence in terms of what gets put in place, what doesn't get put in place, and can you tell us a little more about that? Because that was rather startling to me.
Yeah, I'll try to stay as sanitized as possible with this conversation. I mean, the standard itself is not really heavily vendor participated, right? But what the industry is constantly looking for is for clarification in different areas. And so what happened is they formed special interest groups or special working groups, basically, to provide further clarification in certain areas. So we have them around, the council has them around wireless, scoping, segmentation, virtualization, all these different types of things. And you know, what better, you know, if I was thinking of forming a group like this, what better groups to pull from than those that are actively working in the industry? And so you get vendors from a whole swath of the industry, right? And I'm sure that Katie probably experiences this as well. She's participating, you know, on a working group as well. The difficulty, of course, is the conversations that happen internally to those groups, right? And you know, these types of things in terms of taxonomy or terminology differences, these are happening all the time. And I actually think that, you know, what it comes down to is if you are going to engage vendors in the community, it's important you engage as many as possible so that one doesn't have a type of dominant interest over the other. You know, and then beyond that, it's difficult because, again, the whole panel is too many cooks in the kitchen. So I see many times these special interest groups have quite literally too many cooks in the kitchen trying to define the word "the" or define the word, you know, whatever it might be, and it becomes difficult.
So, David, do you see things like that?
Absolutely. Well, with NERC drafting committees, it's made up of asset owners. Sorry. With the NERC drafting committee, it's made up of asset owners from across the industry, and by and large, there are a few security people that are involved in these draft meetings, but they tend not to be. They tend to be more for the asset owners that are more geared toward the power systems themselves, as opposed to a security bent. So then you have that sort of battle. As well, I'm also involved in several NIST subcommittees for smart grid, and again, you see similar battles again. Although you also see, especially with the the NIST privacy group on smart grid, you see a great deal of really good work being done. So, I mean, there are checks and balances along the way, but yeah, there tend to be an overabundance of opinions that tend to drown each other out, and the more people you get involved, the more of a sane playing field you can get. It doesn't always work out that way, but.
Yeah, one of the things that was not really startling but depressing to me about 201, and as there's a show and it carries throughout, was the narrow scope of people who are actually engaged in shaping the evolution of it. It evolved over a year and a half, 2 years after the first public draft came out, and you know, I tend to be fairly cynical, but every now and then I get idealistic about crazy things like democracy and government. It doesn't take long to be reeled back in. But what happened here in Massachusetts was there were public hearings, and I thought, hey, great, public hearings, let's see when they are. For reference, the public hearings were all held downtown Boston, weekday late mornings. So the only people who could actually engage in the conversation were, by and large, people who had a financial interest in it ongoing. So if you had a credit card reissued because of TJX or Heartland or somebody, you weren't going to take a full day off of work and spend a day in Boston and pay $30 to park for a couple hours. However, if you happen to own a chain of stores, or were legal counsel or something for